4 teens convicted of murder were called the Fairbanks Four, but were they innocent the whole time? After 20 years, more evidence came out that police had possibly hidden proof of their innocence, and multiple alternative suspects have been named and confessions have been made, none that have anything to do with the Fairbanks Four. This is a story of a wrongful conviction, an exoneration, injustice, and lives that were completely ruined and taken from these teen boys, not to mention the life of the victim, who we still do not have confirmation of exactly what happened to. Reporter, professor, and author Brian Patrick O'Donoghue has actually written a full case study about this. He was one of the first reporters who actually started to cover the possible injustice and wrongful conviction of these teen boys, and he really got the ball rolling on getting them exonerated. This case is not what it seems at any point. And the more information that you are given, the more information you desire. Out of all of the suspects that have been named in this case, I would love to know which one you are leaning towards in the comments down below. You are such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my video. I am Brooke Mckenna. Here on this channel, we focus on the victims and the survivors over the killers and the perpetrators. That's something that you are also passionate in doing. I would love for you to subscribe, give this video a thumbs up, and come back every single Sunday for a brand new upload. But first, let's give a quick thank you to our sponsor, Love and Pies. I've told you guys about this game before because I love it. It's the perfect combination of having this cozy, charming small town that you're getting to decorate while also having this mystery throughout. You can help Amelia rebuild her family's cafe that was burnt down mysteriously while also uncovering family secrets behind who could have actually done that. One of my favorite parts is that Love and Pies actually decorates seasonally. So right now they are doing the Winter Tales event, which is basically where you can get these stickers throughout the entire gameplay, which are based on tales that are during the winter. And they work with actual artists to create these unique designs. They are actually starting their sticker album on Love and Pies, and it's super cool because not only can you unlock bigger and better rewards the more stickers you get, but it's kind of like digitally scrapbooking and keeping all of these in an album. Their exclusive sticker album event usually unlocks at level 16, but they're having an exclusive early access, so download with my link down below and you will also get an exclusive gift of 200 energy and 50 gems when you download for free down below. Thank you guys for always supporting my sponsors. It really means the world and lets them know that you guys are involved and that you really support the content that I'm making. Now let's get back to the story. So this occurred all the way back in 1997 in Fairbanks, Alaska. It was around 2:50 in the morning of October 11th, and Fairbanks police responded to an injured male on the street. This was at 9th and Barnett Street, where a young male was lying unconscious. He appeared to have been badly beaten, and he didn't react to any of the sirens or the calls out for him when the police arrived. It was 8 degrees out. There was snow on the ground, and he laid still with his pants around his knees. These were said to be blue corduroy pants. There was a pool of blood nearby his head, and he was lying next to a vehicle. The boy showed no signs of consciousness, and when his pupils were looked into with a flashlight, neither responded. They knew that this boy was in dire condition, and police theorized that this could have been a possible hit and run because he was so close to the road, but they knew regardless, trauma had happened to this young man that night. So this boy was rushed to the nearby Memorial Hospital and placed on life support. Meanwhile, police worked to identify him. He did not have any ID on him, and he appeared too young to have any. So they took his photo, they sent it to the local news station, KTVF, to broadcast, and they were hoping that someone would recognize him despite his bad condition. He would be identified as 15-year-old John G. Hartman. He was born on September 15th, 1982, and he moved to Alaska with his family when he was 3 years old. When he was 7 is when they settled in Fairbanks, and John was said to thrive in school. He was doing well socially. He was in a bunch of sports. He played soccer, football, basketball. He also did snow machining and sledding, and he was headed into high school. Now, he actually had one class left of middle school before he could join the others in high school, but that is where he was at this point in his life. Now, he had dreams of actually getting a football scholarship to Michigan State University to study to be a veterinarian. He loved animals, and animals were said to love John just as much, which is always a sign of a very good person. But when his mother, Evelyn, had been informed by police officers at her door that her son was in the hospital, she cried out and fainted in one of the officers' arms. She was a single mother of 4 at this point in her life, and John was her youngest. They called him JG. Now, 24 hours after he arrived at the hospital at 6:37 p.m. on October 12th, he would be taken off of life support. They had found 0 brain activity. And while trying to find who had done this to this 15-year-old, it turned into a murder investigation. While they had no leads, they began to focus on other teens in the area who might have known John or seen him that night or possibly even have been with him. But this evening of the murder was a busy one for Fairbanks Police Department, with many 911 calls coming in for assistance. So much so that the dispatcher was actually begging off-duty officers to come in and help. You see, an hour and a half after John was found in the snow, Fairbanks Police Department had been called to break up a party. This was around 4:30 a.m. at the Alaska Motor Inn. As the police arrived, many began fleeing, leading investigators to believe that they were mostly underage and didn't want to get caught intoxicated. Now, the 911 caller was actually the night manager of this inn and claimed that they were all minors, and he kind of helped to shut down this party, and he was also the one that called. But he had been told when he had called in that there was lots of 911 calls that needed attention, so it may have been a little bit longer till they could get to him. So he decided to go out and spray them all with pepper spray, and that's when they began to kind of disperse. And so he called police back saying, you don't need to come, I handled it. However, an officer did end up showing up just to make sure that everything was okay. And so the officer was actually headed back to the station after this happened and saw a very young man wobbling down what was 5th Avenue, which was right next to the Alaska Motor Inn. So he pulled over. He believed that this could be one of the minors from the party, and so that is when he would begin talking to this boy and realize that he was in fact intoxicated. This ended up being 17-year-old Eugene Vint, and he was taken to the police department. This was actually his 3rd related alcohol offense in a few weeks. But the same night that John was found, another 911 call had come in from a woman named Carol Pease. She had told the dispatcher that someone needed to come to her home and get her son. She said he had been drinking and he hit her. Her son, Kevin, was 19 years old. He was 6 feet tall, 200 pounds. He was a boxer, and he actually had several warrants for his arrest at this time. He was a high school senior who weeks prior had been pulled over for simply failing to stop at a stop sign. However, his license was already suspended, and when he was arrested, he started kicking the driver's side rear door, breaking interior padding. This caused a whole scene, and so of course, Kevin was then taken into police custody at that time. And now Kevin Pease was going to be arrested for the assault of his mother and also taken to the station. So at this point within the Fairbanks Police Department was 17-year-old Eugene, who had been stopped for drinking, 19-year-old Kevin, who had assaulted his mother, and the inn's night manager, a 27-year-old named Mike, who was there to confirm if Eugene had been at the party. By the time questioning began, the victim, 15-year-old John, had already been found and was clinging to life at the hospital. So when the night manager, Mike, was spoken to, he was asked if he had seen anyone at the party wearing brown camos, what Eugene was found wearing. He told them that there was somebody there, but he didn't know what happened to him after he had called the police. He was then shown Eugene's photo, and that is when he confirmed that Eugene had been there. Eugene had actually been located just 4 blocks from where John's body was found. And only 2 hours after John had been found at around 5 a.m. on October 11th, Eugene was interrogated. His blood alcohol level was 0.158, so legally intoxicated, and for the next 11 hours, he would be questioned. Now, investigators were finding that 2 of these boys that were at their station at that point knew each other. Eugene Kent went to school with Kevin Pease at Howard Luke High School, and they played basketball together. They were friends. Around the time that questioning was coming to an end, the Fairbanks Police Department received a call from the ER nurse who was taking care of John Hartman. She claimed that around 3:30 p.m., a boy had checked into the ER with an injured foot after a night of heavy drinking. He claimed that he had gotten into a fight prior, but he didn't really know what happened. He was drunk, he had a bruise, he said he kicked someone, and he didn't remember anything else before he woke up with his foot hurting. She believed that this was suspicious and also believed that John Hartman had been stomped to death. And so that is when she connected him to the other patient of hers fighting for his life. She called the police, and this man was identified as 20-year-old George Farisi. A detective spoke with him at the hospital and found that he also went to Howard Luke High School before dropping out before graduation, but he had also played basketball and knew Eugene and Kevin. Found to be a year or two older than them. He was 20 years old, but he was taken in for questioning as well. He claimed that he had zero recollection of that night and was blackout drunk. He had been told by the police that if he was there when John was attacked and fled because he didn't like what was going on, that they could work with that, because they were claiming that that's exactly what Eugene, his friend, had confessed to. So what exactly had Eugene told investigators? Well, he was said to waive his rights to an attorney or to his mother being present. He had 3 interviews spaced hours apart, and he was told that one of his friends was gravely injured from a fight and that other witnesses were talking. When he was asked about the attack on John Hartman, he denied involvement and asked to go home multiple times. He said he was not in the area. He had never seen John before, and Detective Aaron Ring, who was interrogating him, told him that the interrogation would only end if he told the truth. Now, Eugene was saying, "You got it all backwards." Ring said, "Well, straighten me out then here." He said, "I already tried and you don't believe me. You don't believe me. You don't even believe me. Tell you the whole story when you don't believe." And Detective Ring said, "Because it's not true. That's why people don't believe you." Eugene said, "Okay, don't believe me then." And Ring said, "The truth is much easier." Eugene was told by Detective Ring that his footprint had been found in the victim's blood and that there was evidence that he was in fact at that scene. So after the 6th time of asking Eugene confessed that he, Kevin Pease, George Farisi, and their basketball captain, Marvin Roberts, had all attacked John that night. Police Sergeant Dave Kendrick obtained George's boots while he was at the station and actually took them back to the hospital, holding them up to John's face while he was in a coma, and they believed that the tread marks matched the bruises. At this point, the police got a corroborating confession from George as well, and George stated, "I kicked him a couple of times, that was it." He said that Kevin kicked him first, but George also was answering a lot of Detective Ring's questions, saying that he didn't know. He stated, "Alls I know is that we kicked his ass and I don't know why." It was said that neither Eugene or George had time to communicate with each other to make up a story to corroborate on, so investigators believed that they were telling the truth when they confessed. Marvin Roberts, the basketball captain who was implicated in the crimes, was taken to the station where he told the police that he was sober that entire night of the murder. He was at a wedding and he had nothing to do with it. And while Kevin Pease was already arrested the night of the murder for assaulting his mother, he was also interrogated for John's attack, and he too denied knowing anything. You see, John Hartman did not go to Howard Luke High School, so he was not believed to know any of these boys from school. So all 4 of the boys were identified as suspects in the public, and the bail was set at $1 million apiece. The chief detective stated that they were not looking for anyone else, but they also did not state a motive in the murder. They did, however, claim that this was not only a physical assault, it was a sexual assault as well. 3 of the 4 suspects were Athabascan natives, where the victim was Caucasian, and this caused a lot of controversy in the community. Many people did not believe that there was enough evidence to prove at trial that these men or boys were guilty. Though 4 days after John Hartman died, police had spoken to a potential witness. This was a man named Orlo Wilson, and he will come about within this story many more times. He told the police he had seen Kevin, Eugene, George, and Marvin in a car together after beating up not John, but another man earlier that night that John was killed. Orlo Olson said that he could clearly identify all of them in the dark from 550 feet away where he was parked. So by October 21st, all 4 of the boys pleaded not guilty to murder and essay. And a year and 4 months later, George Fries was the first to go to trial. His stepfather said that the act was so sick that it couldn't have been the act of a human, though some of George's family members said that he was so sweet and so kind and couldn't have done this.
And so there ain't no explanation, there ain't no none of that. And that's just some vague statement that, because I didn't have any details about any kind of motive or whatever.
Because you didn't know what your motive was that night, did you?
Because there isn't any. I didn't do it.
But it was his own statements that prosecutor Adrian...
What you are trying to say is that I broke down and just started confessing to something. I just started agreeing to whatever they were telling me the entire time, was that I had taken part in this, that they had witnesses, and that I kicked him a couple times, that Kevin started it, and that all that. I just started agreeing to it.
With that limited examination, I found no correspondence between the injuries that I observed, those feature shapes of the injuries, and any of the shapes of the shoe lugs as represented on that partial shoe impression.
Eugene Vint actually testified at his trial in his own defense. Detective Ring testified that when he asked Eugene about how his footprint got in the blood, even though they didn't actually have a footprint in the blood, Eugene looked down at his shoe and started to wipe it off as though he feared that there might be blood there. He said that Eugene tried to blame 2 of his friends that wanted him to help them score weed that night, and the detective claimed that he knew that those 2 friends were not even in the state at that time. Now, Eugene testified that if he wasn't drunk that night and during the interrogation, he wouldn't have made that story up. He said he was just agreeing with what the detective was saying and lying through the whole thing, but he didn't know why he was lying. Kevin and Marvin were then tried together, and forensic tests revealed that there was no physical evidence on the victim or at the crime scene connecting these men to this crime. So all 4 boys were found guilty. The prosecutor said that they acted like a predatory pack, like wolves, to take down a larger animal. Then a native village began to demand justice, claiming inadequate investigation and prosecution of these young men, claiming that it was prejudice that often led to injustice and repeated violations of their civil rights as natives. George was stating that the whole system was corrupt and that he would be redeemed, and Kevin claimed that he was a scapegoat for officials of the law. In 1999, they were all sentenced, and for having a prior criminal record, Kevin received 64 years, Eugene received 38 years, Marvin received 33 years, and George received 97 years. But the next year after that, the star witness in all of this, Orlo Olson, allegedly recanted portions of his testimony to George's defense attorney, but he declined to have those conversations taped, so there was no proof of this. Then in 2000, a reporter named Brian O'Donohue began to get letters to the Fairbanks Daily News miner where he worked. Many believed that these boys were innocent and were trying to find proof of that. And in April of 2001, the Tanana Chiefs Conference requested a civil rights review of this case. The next month, Orlo Olson recanted his statement again. However, at the hearing for this, he said he only recanted because he wanted to get out of prison. However, then the next year, Orlo gave some jailhouse interviews recanting his original testimony, saying that he was threatened with perjury if he did not say what the detective wanted him to say. This was Detective Ring. So this is when reporter O'Donoghue, who was also teaching UAF journalism, enlisted his students to investigate this case. He was very passionate about it. Students would end up finding misconduct in the initial trials. This was about an experiment that jurors had actually done that was unauthorized. And this was about whether Orlo Olsen would actually be able to have seen these 4 boys from that distance that night. This misconduct was not uncovered until this moment. So this led to a petition to the Alaska Supreme Court. John Hartman's mother, Evelyn, said, "I do believe there were quite a few people not telling the whole truth. Too many people with stuff to hide." She said that she had a recurring dream, however, that she and a friend shared after the murder. And Evelyn would see herself concealed in bushes behind one of John's friends named Chris Stone. Chris was watching John be beaten, and it was for something that Chris had done. Now, she could not shake this, and Chris Stone had never been named in the public as a suspect. So in 2008, Alaska's New Innocence Project was being created, and they were told about the Fairbanks 4. At this point, Arlo Olsen was recanting his statement once again, but this time in an interview with the reporter O'Donoghue. Orlo said that he was shown Marvin Roberts' car to be able to describe it, and was coerced into this story by Detective Aaron Ring. So this reporter and journalism professor had his students publish the Decade of Doubt series in the newspaper, exposing these questionable evidence and possible police misconduct. By 2009, the Innocence Project took on the case, and this was the beginning of everything. A blog was created called Free the Fairbanks 4, and many supported from all around the world after hearing this story. But this was also the year that the Supreme Court denied the petition about misconduct in a 3-2 decision, even though a judge for the petition wrote that the jurors' experiment was flawed and that there was reasonable possibility that affected the outcome of the trial. Eugene was appealing that his attorney had given him poor counsel and didn't argue against the exclusion of testimony from an expert in police interrogations and false confessions, because he was claiming that he was coerced into it and didn't know why he was lying. So he was actually granted a new hearing at this point. While the reporter and Professor Brian O'Donoghue and his students were researching, they found that during interrogations of the Fairbanks 4, Detective Ring had used the Reed interrogation method, had essentially lied to the suspects about evidence being found against them, even though there wasn't any. During an excerpt of the interview with Eugene, Ring said, "Let me show you a photo of John Hartman and you tell me who it is, okay?" And Eugene said, "I haven't met him, man." He said, "Well, that's the person whose blood you stepped in, so I think you probably know who it is, unless you were just down there taking his stuff. I don't know." Eugene said, "I don't know who that is, man. I might have been there, but I don't know who that is." Ring said, "What do you mean you might have been there, but you don't know who that is?" Eugene said, "If I stepped in his blood, I was there, but I don't know who that is right there." Ring said, "Oh." Eugene said, he doesn't look familiar, and I certainly..." Ring said, "Oh, this is a stranger to you?" And Eugene said, "Stranger, yeah." Eugene was being told information about the crime scene and the attack, and he began to repeat it back to the detective. He once said, "You're starting to make me think like I killed somebody, man. You're trying to fill my brain with things I didn't do." When he told Ring that he was never in a car that night, Ring repeatedly asked him to think about it because they had skid marks that there was a car there, and he'd rather hear it from him that they were in the car. So minutes later, Eugene was admitting to being in a car. The interrogation continued like this until Eugene named himself and 3 of his friends as the killers. But when it came to Arlo's witness statement, Arlo admitted to being intoxicated and using drugs, while also still being certain that he saw all 4 men from 550 feet away in the dark. And now he was saying that he was coerced into that. But during research, it was also found exactly what John Hartman was doing the last day of his life. it was believed that he had actually been with friends at Noah's Rainbow Inn that night, not the Alaskan Motor Inn where the party was broken up at and where Eugene was said to have come from. According to a taxi driver's run sheet, John and two friends shared a cab to Lorraine Street at about 1:15 a.m., and the assault was believed to happen about 20 minutes later, with him being found about 2 hours later. Now, Lorraine Street, where John was last seen by his friends, was about 6 minutes from the Alaska Motor Inn and 5th Avenue, where Eugene was picked up from. So the day before John was murdered, John had met his girlfriend Shiva for lunch. They met around 10:40 a.m. They had been doing this every day for the 3 weeks they had been together, and they had met John's friend Chris Stone at the McDonald's. This was just across the street from the school. Chris would actually say that John was wearing his blue corduroy pants at the time, and they joked about it because they were big on John. Now, October 10th was this school day, and Chris Stone was skipping school where he went at West Valley High School. John was one class short of finishing junior high, so he technically wasn't in high school at this point. And Shiva was still going to school. She just took her lunch break and then she was going to head back. So that's what she did, and the boys continued to hang out. They went to the public library. They went to Lucky Aces where John's mom worked. And his mother would say that she had about 8 or 9 customers when they came in, so she gave John some money for food, and he told her that he was probably going to go spend the night at a friend's that night. She said that at that point, he was actually wearing a camo jacket and camo pants. This was around 2 p.m. When Chris was spoken to, he stated that after that, they went to the Bentley Mall. They hung out with some other kids. They ate more McDonald's. They bought more snacks. And around 4 p.m., they were headed back to West Valley to Noah's Rainbow Inn. You see, their friend E.J. Stevens was babysitting there. So they actually got a ride with their friend and arrived at 5 p.m. Chris said while there, they found a bottle of Wellbutrin, an antidepressant, and they took a few pills around 8 p.m. Chris said he took around 8 to 10 pills, and John took less. And then more friends showed up with a box of wine. This was Eric and Trent. And these friends would actually speak to police as well. And they would tell police that when they arrived, John was actually sitting in a chair when he suddenly hit the ground and started to go into convulsions. He was having a seizure. They said that he was wearing all camo. He got very sick. When he finally came to, they were asking him all these questions, but Chris was answering for him. They then calmed John down after his seizure. They took him outside, and John told them that he took a hit of acid. But the rest of the night, he just sat there pale-faced until Eric and Trent left around 10 p.m. Now, this is when the father of the kids that EJ was babysitting came home around 1 a.m. and told the boys to leave. So they got a King cab, and the cab driver remembered picking up John Hartman, Chris Stone, and E.J. Stevens at Noah's Rainbow Inn and took them to downtown Fairbanks to E.J.'s house. E.J. claimed that he offered for both of them to stay the night, but they declined because John's house was just down the street. Chris stated that they went off, just the two of them. They split up on Airport Access Way and Lorraine, where John was actually headed to a Mexican restaurant where his mom occasionally worked. However, EJ's mother stated that she watched Chris and John walk in the same direction that night. So friends EJ, Trent, Eric, who were all with the boys this night, would claim that Chris had John on some sort of drug cocktail and that something happened with Chris and Chris knows. They said they knew he knew more, but no drugs were found in John Hartman's system at the time of his death. It was also discovered that 3 weeks earlier, Chris Stone, John's friend, had been found beaten at Fort Knox gold mine. He was hitchhiking, but he had bruises all over his face, head, and down his back. He was rushed to the hospital. He couldn't remember anything at first. EJ had been with him that night and said that Chris had left to go to the store with some friends, but EJ was also said to be uncooperative in the police questioning. Chris began getting his memory back at that time, but he refused to talk or tell anybody what actually happened, so the case was closed, and the final report of this incident was filed 4 days after John Hartman's murder. Then, a few months after the murder, Chris Stone was arrested for accessory in a case where he held a woman at knife point. And he was interviewed about John once again. Chris said that he saw Kevin Pease that night. He said he remembered a blue car parked with white or native kids hovering by the liquor store entrance. And other witnesses would later claim that Kevin drove a small blue car. But that's all that Chris really said about the attack. However, when Chris would end up testifying during these trials, he finally gave the name of his own assailants the 3 weeks prior. One was a man named Dale LePew, who had been his friend. Pugh would actually later be charged with the murder of a cab driver that he chased, beat, lured into the woods before slitting his throat. And Dale LePew was theorized as an alternative suspect for the defense during the trial. A witness claimed that she heard Dale and his friends talking about knocking heads the night of the murder. Then they came home with $160 cash. There was no connection found to John's murder, but this is something the defense tried to use in court, saying that Dale LePew could actually be the killer. So that was a bit more into the connection of Dale to Chris Stone to John Hartman. But there was also a witness who was a cashier at the local store, Carr's Foodland Supermarket, who stated that Chris Stone came running into her shop that night. This was around 1:45 a.m., which was about an hour prior to when John was found. She thought that Chris was going to have people running in after him because he looked that afraid. He radiated fear. And she asked him if there was someone that he could call. And he said, "You can't call my mom." The cashier believed that she heard Chris saying something about a friend being hurt, but she couldn't remember the exact words. She eventually called his mother, and his mother called a cab to pick up her son. Chris Stone countered this witness testimony, saying that he was just paranoid because he was high on pills and it had nothing to do with anything real. So then many began to theorize that Dale LePew had robbed and killed John Hartman and that Chris Stone was actually present at the time of the attack and witnessed this. So Dale LePew was questioned, and he said he had nothing to do with it and was actually out of state at the time. This theory wasn't believed to be investigated very long, and he was never thought to be a suspect. So as you can tell, there were many bits of information that, if left out and not investigated, could be a problem in this case. And that was not all. Through research, it was actually discovered that there was testimony of an alibi of Marvin Roberts, one of the Fairbanks Four, for the night of the murder. He had said he was at a wedding, and the woman who was the bride said that he sat next to her at the table at the wedding reception that night. She testified when she had come forward with this information, the interview was very short. There was only direct questions. No one believed her. She had contacted the police, and they basically just disregarded her and didn't even have her statement on record. Another man who was not called to testify in the trial said he spent his night with Eugene and Kevin, or was in contact with them the entire night, and he had gone to the police with this information, but he said that a detective threatened to arrest him for the murder if he didn't admit that he was lying about that. He said he was then interviewed several times, and because his statement didn't match the story they were trying to create, they were trying to get him to change his story, and he wouldn't do so. It was believed that the Fairbanks PD withheld and fabricated evidence when it didn't fit the narrative. But this was all just a theory at this point. But John Hartman had a brother named Chris Kelly, and he was actually wanted for parole violations at the time of the murder and was hiding at his mother's house. He had ripped off a drug dealer who was running a $1 million cocaine operation. And months after the murder, Chris told the police that he had actually been told the night of the murder that his kid brother might be in bad company over at Noah's Rainbows Inn. He had spoken to people who he knew who were there, and they said that his brother was okay. But Chris was feeling guilty, and he wondered if his criminal activity had anything to do with his brother's murder. But this case just gets crazier from here, because these teens who were convicted of murder and placed in jail had been there for 14 years. And this was 2011, when a man came forward to reveal that he had actually heard a confession to the murder all the way back in 1997. Scott Davidson was a high school student at the time of the murder who claimed that a man named Jason Wallace confessed to him and another classmate, Matt Ellsworth, that he killed John Hartman. The three were driving around after skipping school when Wallace told them that he beat, kicked, and left Hartman on the side of the road. But Wallace said if they told anyone, he would kill them too. Scott Davidson said that he carried this information with him for years, knowing that 4 innocent people were in jail for a crime they did not commit, and he felt the need to come forward. After this came out in 2011, police were said to question Matt Ellsworth, the other man who was allegedly in the car, to corroborate this story, but Ellsworth claimed he did not know either of those guys and did not recall this confession. However, this statement would change. But while looking into this man who allegedly confessed to the murder the year of the murder, Jason Wallace, they found that back in 2003, just 6 years after the murder, Jason Wallace was arrested in connection to a multi-state drug murder conspiracy. 3 people were killed and 1 survived a stabbing. Wallace had killed a 25-year-old woman with a hammer to try to take over the drug ring. He had been sentenced to 70 years, and he was actually arrested with another man named William Holmes. They had known each other from all the way back in Fairbanks. They both had parents stationed there in the Army. They went to Lathrop High School together, and they were friends. Holmes was also in prison for a double life sentence because he had murdered 2 people. Holmes would actually be the reason that the Alaska Innocence Project would go on to file post-conviction relief and ask the Alaska Bureau of Investigation to conduct an independent review of this case. We will get into exactly how Holmes had anything to do with this, but at this point, one of the Fairbanks 4, Marvin Roberts, was actually released from prison on early parole. Now, this was said to be due to a deal with the governor, where saying that the whole case was properly investigated, prosecuted, and convicted, that there was no sort of corruption or misconduct in the investigation. So this had nothing to do with proving his innocence. Now, while this alleged confession about Wallace and Holmes was in 2011, it wasn't until October 5th of 2015 that this alleged confession was leaked to the public by the Daily News Miner. That is when everyone heard that there could be other suspects, and one that actually confessed. So a post-conviction relief hearing was held to reconsider the murder convictions of the Fairbanks 4. This was 18 years after the murder, and it was claimed that they not only had an alternative suspect, Jason Wallace, the man who allegedly confessed to murder to another high school student, he had also later made incriminating statements about John Hartman's murder when he was arrested for the drug conspiracy. His partner, Holmes, allegedly also confessed to involvement in John's attack, but claimed that the beating was done by Wallace. He said he was driving his mother's maroon Ford Tempo with 4 classmates, all 17-year-olds, in the car, looking for drunk Alaska natives to harass, beat, and rob. He said instead they found a white boy whose pockets were emptied while one of them kicked his head. Holmes said he only parked the car while the other 4 got out, ran up to John Hartman, and then they ran back, telling him to go. Holmes said he asked what happened, and they told him that they knocked the boy down, stomping him repeatedly. They then acted like that night never happened. Holmes had actually written a confession in prison, admitting it was him and his friends who killed John. He wrote this after confessing verbally to a prison guard. He stated, "Mentally, I have lived as if that night never happened since that time. I was able to observe the boy across the street in front of us and got a good look at him. He matched the pictures and the descriptions I later saw of John Hartman, and I am sure the boy who was chased down and stomped that night was John Hartman." He then filed a sworn statement and included details that accurately depicted the murder, and he didn't have to be interrogated and told that information. Then Scott Davidson testified, the man who had broken this case wide open, about the confession from Wallace.
We saw this person crossing the street on the other side of the street. So we all got excited and said, "Hey, we got one." And we waited for the guy to cross the street, and I was waiting. And it was probably, it felt like a little while, but I would say it was maybe like 2-3 minutes. And I was debating whether or not to get out the car because I felt like they were taking long, and I opened up the car door. When I opened up the car door and kind of stood up, everybody came bolting back around the corner full speed, yelling, "Go, go, 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 go." And they all hopped in the car. I pulled out, I made a right, and I went across Airport Way, heading kind of towards, I believe there was a pawn shop right there, and Lathrop High School was off to the right. My memory serves me correct. Jason Wallace was in the front seat, and Rashawn Brown, Shelmar Johnson, and Marquez, they were all in the back kind of yelling, you know, man, Jason was tripping, little Jay was tripping, he was tripping, and they were all just kind of talking at the same time. And
were they excited?
Excited, out of breath, all of that. And I was asking them, what happened? What happened? And they just kept saying, little Jay was tripping, he stomped him out, he was tripping, he stomped him out. So I looked over at Jason Wallace and I said, man, what happened? And he was just kind of just looking like he didn't even say anything. He was just in the zone, kind of looking forward, didn't respond. So I got angry at the way everybody kind of was acting. So I just said, man, hey, fuck that. I'm dropping everybody off. And I proceeded to drop everybody off one by one, except for Shelmar Johnson. I believe he came home with me. He handed me a newspaper. I asked him, you know, what's up? And he wouldn't say anything. He handed me a newspaper, pointed to the newspaper. So I began to look at it and still asked him, you know, man, what's up? And I looked, and as I was reading it, I believe the front page, it was saying something about a boy being dead, and it still didn't register until I read I seen Barnett and whatever street it was. And when I read that, that's when, for me, it clicked that was the area that we were in on that Friday night.
But even though he said Matt Ellsworth was there, Matt had originally stated that he wasn't. However, when he was brought in to testify, he then would admit that it in fact was true. He was just scared to say it was. This had been known back in 2011. Cold case investigators testified that they found a confession in a box at the station, but they were told it was pulled off the internet and was a lie. At this point, the mayor of Fairbanks got involved, requesting federal review. And these men, teens at the time, who had confessed, this entirely different group of boys than the Fairbanks Four, were believed to be Jason Wallace, William Holmes, Shelmar Johnson, Rashad Brown, and Marquez Pennington. Now, an Alaska State Trooper who was a cold case investigator, there was actually two of them, they had been diving into the cold case, and they testified that the prosecutor of the original trials, Adrian Bachman, withheld documents from them which hindered their ability to properly investigate. Then, star witness at the original trials, Arlo Olson, who claimed that he had seen the Fairbanks Four, again recanted his original testimony, stating that he was manipulated by Detective Aaron Ring and the former prosecutor to memorize the transcripts. But in order to get Jason Wallace to testify at this post-conviction relief hearing, they had to grant him immunity. Wallace would eventually testify that he heard of John's murder years after. He denied being in the area, having any involvement.
People say that you made admissions to them about being on the corner of 9th and Barnett. Have you ever told somebody that you were on the corner of 9th and Barnett?
I've never told anybody that.
See anybody else kick or assault John Hartman?
No, ma'am.
How about this? Did you ever hear anybody else take responsibility for the John Hartman attack?
No, ma'am.
But this was after his statement to his attorney claiming that he was the driver of the car, not Holmes, and that the other men got out and assaulted John Hartman. But Wallace was told on the stand that since he was granted immunity, he had nothing to lose unless he gave a false testimony, and yet he still denied it. He was seen laughing and smiling during the hearing.
Jason Wallace told me what he told me, and I'm never going to forget that. So he wasn't just some random guy I picked to blame this on. I didn't know Jason Wallace from Adam when I walked in there. When it started making the paper, he thought, within the next day or so, I'm not sure exactly, but within the next few days, he thought that someone else had come along and actually murdered Mr. Hartman.
Why was that?
Well, because of the allegation of sexual assault, they knew they hadn't sexually assaulted him. and they had discussed it, so they just assumed that someone else must have come along and did that to them.
So the Alaska Federation of Natives asked the governor to free the Fairbanks Four, standing together with four fingers held in the air. Marvin Roberts was out on parole, and he spoke out at a convention. He stated that he was coerced into signing that governor's deal for parole.
It is a battle. We've experienced this for a long time, but I've also experienced something else. It is the kind and beautiful acts that people will do to free us from this nightmare. I ask that you keep helping us. Please stop this hurt. I thank God for everything.
Now, shockingly enough, while waiting for the judge to make a decision on the post-conviction hearing, William Holmes gave an interview to KTVF where he admitted on camera to the murders, that not only that he was imprisoned for in California, but he then spoke to Hartman's family, saying they need to let those boys out. They are innocent.
Initially, it was just I would do anything to provide for my weed habit, and it began to lead into robbing people, stealing from people, burglarizing houses. And that's how I began to go down that road, and it just got worse and worse. It wasn't until I started delving into selling cocaine that things really spiraled out of control. But in order to be on top in the drug game, you had to be the most ruthless. So I chose to be, instead of being the prey, I chose to be the predator, and I took that to the max.
You were put up on trial for killing 2 people. And they keep pressuring you, asking you, why didn't you use the information that we'll get into, what you know, against the other people in that case to get you a lesser sentence?
Honestly, when I met back up with Jason Wallace in 2002, it was like me and him were like dynamite. If I don't believe I would ever fully got to that place without him, but when we met back up, he was crazy. By then, I was crazy. So it was like we put together this plan, but as far as me, what I did in California, I mean, I pumped myself up. Once I was down there, I did feel like, well, we're in this together. He's expecting me to take care of these guys and get the money, and I'm expecting him to make sure that nobody's able to say that I came on the trips. I think once I left Alaska, it was like I felt like, man, I gotta do it. I mean, it's the first time I've ever admitted to anybody that I killed them.
Is there any question that those 4 guys killed John Hartman in your mind?
No, there's no doubt in my mind. People responsible for John Hartman losing his life is the 5 guys that I mentioned, including me. The person that killed John Hartman is Jason Wallace. I'd first like to start with the Hartman family, and I like to tell them that, I mean, it's very hard for me to even address them because I'm pretty sure they don't want to hear anything from me. But I still want to apologize to them for my role and responsibility and their son or brother or whoever he was to them to lose his life senselessly like that. And I just want to tell them that any anger or resentments or need for justice that they may feel should not be directed towards the Fairbanks Four. It should be directed towards us. And I stand here today, or I sit here today, and I tell them with every fiber in my being that the person that killed John Hartman was Jason Wallace. And to the Fairbanks Four, I want to apologize to them as well because they can't get back this 18 years that they've lost while being in prison. So to them, I want to apologize to them for my responsibility and role in any way that they've lost these 18 years of their lives. I'd like to apologize to their mothers and fathers in the Native community. I remember reading in a paper that one of their moms talked about because of the proceedings that she was losing hope. And I just hope in some way, form or fashion that she continues to keep hope and continue to believe in her son's innocence.
But still, 3 of the Fairbanks Four were in prison, while 1 was on parole, and they were all still convicted murderers. But on December 14th of 2015, the Fairbanks Four submitted a court filing maintaining their innocence, as they always had. 2 days later, they would sign a deal with the state allowing immediate release and erasure of their convictions. However, this also stated that they agreed not to sue.
It's unbelievable feeling right now. And I didn't expect it to be like this, but I knew it would be awesome. Once again, thank you guys for everything. Never giving up. You guys kept us going. We never gave up because of you guys. Thank you.
All of our prayers have been answered. And it's simply amazing. It's crazy. It's like never even happened, But definitely feel love. Love all you guys.
2 years later, they sued the city anyway, and several police officers saying that they were coerced into agreeing and that the Fairbanks police had manufactured evidence to convict them of murder that they did not commit. That they wanted to conceal their misconduct by forcing the Fairbanks Four to sign this illegal and coercive agreement. So George, Kevin, and Eugene settled for $1.6 million each, and Marvin Roberts fought for a bit more and got $11.5 million. He said, "No amount of money can make up for my time in prison. This settlement, however, gives me freedom with my life and most importantly, more time with my daughter and my parents who supported me throughout this nightmare."
Petitioners stipulate and agree that the original jury verdicts and judgments of conviction were properly and validly entered based on proof beyond a reasonable doubt. The state will not seek retrial in any of the underlying criminal cases and will file dismissals pursuant to Criminal Rule 43A of the indictments in the above referenced cases.
This manufactured evidence was referring to the star witnesses' coercion into false statements implicating the Fairbanks Four, as well as the interrogation techniques that were alleged to give false confessions. Now, none of these settlements required anyone to admit fault or even issue an apology to these four. It was widely believed that this was a wrongful conviction due to an anti-Native American bias in Alaska. It was said that although the men had alibis, the alibis were given by other Native Americans, and so everyone ended up being dismissed. But in 2024, it was revealed in a secret report to the governor at that time, Bill Walker, that he had an independent lawyer hired to review the case, and this man had concluded in 2015 that the men were innocent. He said, "I have come to the firm belief that the Fairbanks Four did not commit the crimes of which they are convicted. In other words, in my view, the information I reviewed constitutes clear and convincing evidence that they are innocent." However, this was never public information until this time. A 16-page report documented evidence found. This stated that on the night of the murder, another boy had been assaulted and robbed about 0.7 miles away from John. This was a man named Franklin Dayton. Eugene and Kevin had been convicted of his assault as well. He survived, but he didn't see his attackers. However, Jason Wallace allegedly stated that prior to John's attack, they had assaulted a different person as well. There was also evidence that this investigator found that one of the men in the Wallace Holmes group, Marquez Pennington, had confessed to two people about the killings, one of which went to Fairbanks police in 2014 telling officers about it. They didn't listen. He died a few months later and nothing was done with his statement. Another man who was supposedly in the car that night, Shelmar Johnson, had a half-sister who allegedly stated that the Fairbanks Four were innocent. She knew that and that her brother had confessed to her, though she later did deny this. There was also a statement from that night of another Alaska native who reported being accosted by a group of young black men who intended to assault him, but he narrowly escaped. So, some theorized maybe this was a completely different group of men who killed John Hartman. Maybe not the Fairbanks Four, maybe not the Holmes and Wallace group, maybe somebody completely different. But this report concluded by saying that the Fairbanks Four confessions were extracted by aggressive interrogation techniques that were said to be grossly improper. But the statements from Holmes and Wallace were entirely voluntary and had been corroborated by other evidence. So this investigator firmly believed that the Holmes-Wallace account was true, that they were the ones who killed John Hartman. What do you believe? Because while these teens who were wrongfully convicted have finally gotten out and gotten a bit of justice, John Hartman's family, they still don't have answers on what happened to him. And after 20 years, to hear that there was a completely other confession is absurd. It appeared as though the Fairbanks Police Department had their sights set on these 4 men, and there was not another route that they were going to even try to go down. Now, while many said that the boys were coerced into false statements, the police department were said to be using that Reed technique. This is a highly controversial technique, but it is one that was taught for quite some time. Do you believe this is something that should never be used in interrogations? Have you heard of it before? And with all of these statements that seem to be ignored, were the police hiding proof of innocence of these men, especially with the alibis that were coming in that just were ignored? Was this done on purpose? Was this just a lack of proper investigation and they were just pushed to the wayside and the focus was on these men just because they truly believed that they were guilty? Or was there something more sinister going on where no matter what sort of evidence was going to come through the door, if it didn't match the story that they were creating, it wasn't going to be heard? That is terrifying. After hearing everything, I am so glad that I researched this case and could bring it to you. I have not seen anybody else on YouTube cover this, so give me a thumbs up for that. I love finding you guys cases that are not widely covered. This one definitely deserves to be heard. And a huge shout out to Brian Patrick O'Donohue, who is not only the reporter who exposed all of this, but has written a book about it. And like, this is his life's work. This is something he is so passionate about. Yeah, I will link all of his stuff down below. He has done incredible work along with his students that have helped him to uncover so many different things. Without him, they might still be in prison today. But I'm sending so much love to the Fairbanks 4. Thank you guys so much for listening. I appreciate you so incredibly much. Go watch the last video if you haven't. We have started a new series. There's going to be so much to come in the new year, but there is a new series in our latest video, and it was about a corrupt official that ended up turning into a killer of the journalist who was exposing him. So it's very interesting. I know that didn't go out to a lot of subscription boxes. It never does in December. So do me a favor, click on that, watch that if you're interested. Highly recommend. That's a crazy case. And also don't forget to download Love and Pies with my link. I know that you'll absolutely love to play it. But don't forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces. Okay. Bye.